Now in 1987, the mother of murder victim Stacy Moskowitz, the last one to die.
Trends are something that have existed for quite a long time, even before the days of the internet. So today we'll get into the juiciest and jaw-dropping stories that would have had Twitter on fire, hashtags trending, and made internet memes overflow. Here are the 1970 scandals that would have broken the internet.
The Jimi Hendrix experience is over. The acid rock music.
The deaths of Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. In the early 1970s, when rock and roll was at its zenith, the world was in love with the talents of Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. It was sad when they were gone just as fast as they rose to fame. Jimi Hendrix was 27 years old and a guitar god who died in September of 1970, and then Janis Joplin just a month later. When we all thought that we'd had enough, Jim Morrison died in July of 1971. The internet would have been full of discussions about the pressures of fame, and short videos of their music clips would have filled up TikTok while tributes would flood YouTube.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
The Watergate Scandal. It all begins in June of 1972 when there was a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. Afterwards, there were attempts by the Nixon administration to cover it all up, but all of these attempts would be leaked through voice tapes between the president and different people. The scandal happened during the presidency of Richard Nixon from 1972 to 1974 and is defined as the biggest political controversy in the United States to date. In the end, the scandal led to the resignation of the president, and it was the first and only U.S. presidency so far to step down from office. The scandal would have dominated social media for months, if not years.
The victim is Patricia Hearst, the daughter of newspaper executive Randolph Hearst and a granddaughter of the legendary William Randolph Hearst.
The kidnapping of Patty Hearst. Kidnappings happen every day, but the Patty Hearst kidnapping was one that had turned an heiress into a revolutionary. It all begins in February of 1974 when 19-year-old college student Patty Hearst was kidnapped from her apartment in Berkeley, California. She was taken by a group of armed men and women who called themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army. The SLA were trying to instigate a war between the U.S. government and had already shot at 2 Oakland school officials. Patty Hearst came from a wealthy and powerful family, so it was a way to get the attention of the people. Afterwards, the SLA began releasing audio tapes demanding money and food in exchange for her release, and before long, Hearst herself was said to have joined the fight against the United States government and was even caught on camera actively participating in a bank robbery. How they had managed to turn an heiress into a revolutionary would have caused a burst of conspiracy theories online if the internet had existed back then.
The guardsmen opened fire on the students.
67 shot.
The Kent State shootings. When President Nixon was campaigning, one of his major promises was to bring an ending to the Vietnam War. However, in late April of 1970, the U.S. invaded Cambodia, which made the Vietnam War more intense. This decision would be announced on national television and radio by President Nixon himself, but anti-war protests began across the United States college campuses the next day. Kent State University was not left out of the anti-war protest. Students were giving speeches against the war and the Nixon administration, and a copy of the Constitution would be burned to symbolize the murder of it because Congress had never declared war. The decision would be made by the administration to bring in the Ohio National Guard to scare away protesters, and it was originally supposed to have been a scare but turned into a confrontation between students and members of the Guard. The Guard fired into the crowd of Kent State University demonstrators, which led to the death of 4 students, leaving 9 others severely wounded. The impact of the shootings was more than dramatic, and the event triggered a nationwide student strike which forced hundreds of colleges and universities to close. The death of Graham Parsons. 26-year-old musician Graham Parsons died of multiple drug use in a California motel room, which led to one of the most bizarre crimes known to man. Everyone who loved country music knew the superstar Graham Parsons. It was said that he had made a drunken pact with his road manager, Phil Kaufman, that if anything ever happened to him, his body should be taken to Joshua Tree and cremated. To fulfill this, when Parsons died, two of his friends pretended to be workers from a mortuary. They hijacked Parsons' body from the airport and stashed it in a borrowed hearse. They then drove into the middle of Joshua Tree National Park, where they doused it with gasoline and set it on fire. Campers had reported the burning casket to local authorities, who investigated the incident and identified both of the perpetrators.
The boss was a cop called Joe Borelli. This is his story of the search for the Son of Sam.
The Son of Sam murders. American serial killer David Berkowitz went by the name of Son of Sam, and he confessed to multiple shootings in New York City. Berkowitz was an Army veteran who had escaped the biggest police manhunt in the city's history for just over a year, and during that time he wrote letters under the moniker that he gave himself, the Son of Sam. He would mock the police and promise to commit more crimes, and the letters were highly publicized by the press, and it seemed that the more popular he became, the more confident he was in his ability to get away. The killer was known to have mainly targeted young women with shoulder-length dark hair, and after 13 long months of terrorizing the city's outer boroughs, police finally tracked him down because of a parking ticket issued near the scene of a recent attack. The Jonestown Massacre. The Jonestown Massacre is one of the largest mass death events in American history, which left around 900 people dead. It all began when Jim Jones started the People's Temple informally in the 1950s. It was a church with no affiliations to any existing religion of the time, originally involving a charitable cause which allowed membership of all races. And there were opportunities for everyone of every race and ethnicity. Things began to take a dark turn when Jones called himself a prophet. He claimed that he was psychic and could heal people with his mind. Before the day of the mass tragedy, it was reported there was a loyalty test conducted to over 1,000 members, consisting of Jones handing out what he called poison and instructing everyone, including the children, to ingest it. The ritual was a trick, but some months afterwards, the real action happened. Jones commanded his followers to take their own lives by ingesting poison.
We have faith that someone, somehow, somewhere, can help us locate our father.
The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. 62-year-old Jimmy Hoffa is a legend that lives on even though he disappeared in 1975. Hoffa was an American labor union leader who had served as the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. He would be convicted of jury tampering, attempted bribery, and conspiracy, along with mail and wire fraud in 1964. He was imprisoned in 1967 and sentenced to 13 years, and then President Nixon commuted his sentence in 1971, on the condition he wouldn't participate in union activity. Once out of prison, Hoffa challenged that idea. On July the 30th of 1975, he had an afternoon meeting planned at a restaurant in suburban Detroit. He went missing that same day, and the vanishing would lead to countless viral theories, investigative podcasts, and social media speculation. The Ford Pinto Scandal. For 7 years, the Ford Motor Company sold vehicles that had faults, knowing full and well that a minor issue would lead to hundreds of people buying the cars and burning to death. The Pinto was one of the hottest-selling subcompacts in the industry that was well known in the 70s. Every family had one, and those who didn't knew someone who did. It maintained its popularity until about 500 deaths and hundreds of injuries were reported, linked to the faulty design in the car. The fault made the gasoline tank vulnerable to explosion after rear-end impact. And if that happened today, along with the lawsuits, the Ford Motor Company would have been massively boycotted because of social media, and it would have arisen from there.
Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack.
The death of Elvis Presley. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, was a legendary singer and movie star. He had his value and impact ingrained in the hearts of everyone in the 1970s, and when he died of heart failure at age 42, it caused worldwide grief. He left everyone in the music industry stunned and millions of fans worldwide devastated, and after his funeral, people began to speculate that he may not have actually died. In the days following the funeral, speculation grew amongst a small group of skeptics that Elvis may not have died after all, and some people said his death was fake so that he could go into hiding. If there had been the internet at the time, it would have been much easier to peddle conspiracy theories. Studio 54. Studio 54 was that place in the 1970s where the music was hot and the fashion was fierce. The guest list was exclusive as it could be, and one of the things that made it legendary was how exclusive that it was. You could only imagine the fear of missing out posts that would be made on Instagram if Studio 54 were in existence today. Apart from the exclusive list, it was known as a hub of scandal and all forms of vice that would have made today's gossip blogs run out of suitable captions. Known for its anything goes atmosphere, in December of 1978 the party came to a halt when it was raided by the IRS for tax evasion. Even the news of its closure would have caused a million hashtags, live tweets, and short videos that captured when the police came in. The arrest of Roman Polanski. When 43-year-old filmmaker Roman Polanski was arrested and charged in Los Angeles, California, everyone who had a heart couldn't wait to hear him pay for his crimes. He was charged with offenses against Samantha Gailey, a 13-year-old female at the time. They included numerous heinous sexual crimes, including perversion and lewd and lascivious conduct on a child under the age of 14. After initially pleading not guilty, Polanski changed his plea in order to accept a plea deal, and in today it would have caused an uproar in today's internet. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation was conducted, and Polanski was placed on probation. He then fled the country, and it happened a couple of hours before he was supposed to be formally sentenced. Ever since then, Polanski had mostly lived in France and avoided visiting any countries that could extradite him to the United States. The Exorcist controversy. Imagine the trending clips of people running out of theaters, shaking with fear and fainting in the aisles, with such videos getting millions of views and comments of people debating whether they had the guts to watch The Exorcist. If social media had been around at the time The Exorcist was released, users would have argued how it glorified the occult and how disgusting that it was. Religious groups would have taken to Facebook to warn of the dangers of watching the film, and others may have posted blogs and think pieces about its portrayal of faith, possession, and the battle between good and evil.
Here on Highway 74 is where Karen Silkwood's car was found crashed near this culvert.
Karen Silkwood's death. When a whistleblower dies in a car accident on her way to deliver evidence that later comes up missing, it doesn't take a genius to decode that something fishy must have happened. Karen Silkwood was an American lab technician and activist who met her death while on her way to expose the safety violations and negligence of a nuclear facility. Like many whistleblowers before and since, she was deemed a troublemaker and subject to ongoing harassment. On her way to the meeting of a federal union official and a newspaper reporter in Oklahoma City, she crashed her car, sustaining fatal injuries that led to her death. It was reported by state troopers that it was caused by her falling asleep at the wheel. The marks that were on her bumper seemed to indicate she may have been forced off the road, and the envelope that she was supposedly taking to the reporter was never found.
Portland International Airport. A man named Dan Cooper boards Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 to Seattle.
The hijacking of D.B. Cooper. On November the 24th of 1971, a man who called himself Dan Cooper approached the counter of Northwest Orient Airlines in Portland, Oregon, and used cash to buy a one-way ticket on a flight to Seattle, Washington. Moments after the plane had taken off, Cooper had called one of the flight attendants and given her a note saying that he had a bomb in his briefcase and wanted her to sit with him. The flight attendant sat down with him, and Cooper showed a mass of wires and red-colored sticks. He told her to take his demands of parachutes and cash to the captain, and when they landed in Seattle, Cooper released passengers in exchange for the money and the parachutes, but kept several of the crew's members, including the pilot. The plane then took off once again, and some hours after takeoff, Cooper is said to have jumped out of the back of the plane with the parachute and the money, disappearing forever. If this had happened in today's world of phone cameras being turned on everywhere, someone would have likely caught video of him falling from the sky.
It was just after 9:30 p.m. when the streetwalkers in Times Square were suddenly doused in darkness.
The New York City blackout and riots. Lightning struck New York City and it went dark for up to 25 hours. By the time the lights had come back on, the city was not the same it was before the blackout. Thousands of stores had been looted as thieves used the blackout as an opportunity to grab whatever they could get their hands on. Nothing was too luxurious or cheap to be looted. Arsonists had also had a field day of setting over 1,000 fires in different places in the city. Such chaos would have been documented in real time if it were to be in today's world using live videos and tweets. The divorce of Sonny and Cher. After I Got You Babe became a hit of the century in 1965, Sonny and Cher became known as the most prominent married couple in the world of popular music. It's exactly what you would call a power couple today. In 1971, they landed a TV show called the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour, a family event that sometimes featured their daughter Chastity. The show was quite the hit, and while the viewing public had seen them as a happy dream couple, behind closed doors the marriage was broken into pieces due to infidelity, abuse, and more. They finally shocked the fans in 1975 with the news of their divorce. The life and affairs of Elizabeth Taylor. Some people are fortunate enough to have been born in a time when the internet was not a thing, or else they would have been made the record of weekly appearance in gossip blogs throughout their life. Elizabeth Taylor, a British and American actress with 8 marriages to 7 different men, didn't only make headlines, she was the headlines. She was first married to Conrad Hilton Jr., whom she divorced because of his drinking and abusive behavior. She then married a British actor named Michael Wilding, 20 years her junior, and the marriage ended. After this was Mike Todd, who was tragically killed in a plane crash, and then she found comfort in the arms of Eddie Fisher, who happened to be married to her best friend Debbie Reynolds. She then moved on to Richard Burton, and then there was Senator John Warner, and finally Larry Fortensky, whom she met in rehab in the late 1980s. Imagine if she had lived in the buzz of the internet age, she would have had millions of hashtags for her life story. The Mercury Scare. After the war, mercury was everywhere, and most people didn't have a reason to think twice. You could find it in science kits and household thermometers, and even in some skin creams. And as time went on, scientists began to raise alarms about the dangers of exposure. Then came the government warnings. In 1971, the FDA issued its first advisory on mercury, cautioning against its use in certain cosmetics and medicines. In today's world, it would have led to a panic because information can be shared in nanoseconds. And just imagine the amount of misinformation.
It was the first step in a nuclear nightmare. As far as we know at this hour, no worse than that.
The 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. At 4 a.m. on March the 28th of 1979, a malfunction at 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant led to the worst nuclear accident on U.S. soil. The meltdown was recorded as the most serious accident in U.S. commercial nuclear power operating history, and even though it had only small radioactive releases, which no detectable health effects on plant workers or the public, it was still an event that's not to be forgotten. If the internet existed back then the way it does now, it would have led to widespread panic and an avalanche of online debates about safety. Which of these scandals would you have tweeted about? Be sure to let us know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, you'll want to watch this one about forgotten details that made the 1970s unique. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you never miss another great memory in the future.